Hello and welcome to another episode of The Tigers Down Under. I'm your host, Alex, and with me today I have Logan. How are you, Logan?
Good morning, Alex. Yeah, I'm doing well.
Yeah, well, it is a good morning because we are recording this episode in the morning Australian time. It's about, almost 11 p.m. in the UK. But the reason we're doing that is we've just come off a really great, really enjoyable episode of The Wise Men Say, which was sort of an extended Christmas episode with them. And it was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Great to meet Alex and John and see what the Wise Men are doing over there. Reasonably new to the podcasting world this year, but just great ideas and some great guys as well. Really gave us a deep insight as to their time and I guess experience of supporting City. And yeah, it was great to chat with those guys.
Yeah, it was great doing. We're obviously not going to spoil too much of it because that episode will come out probably the next day. But it was great doing they did the rapid fire questions, which was kind of cool to delve into our past on how we sort of became City supporters and favorite players and favorite memories and that sort of thing. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Even to hear from those guys, like the insights of certain away days and stuff that they've been on, and just the people that they had experience with or firsthand experience with around the club, and obviously on the back of their interview with Brian Horton the other week, which was a great listen as well. If you haven't checked that out, I strongly recommend that you make the time and go and do that.
Yeah, that definitely, and that's a great one because I actually didn't mention that when we were on the episode with them, but that interview with Brian Horton was fantastic. You know, it was a great listen. Some really good stories, not just about his time at City, but just his time in football in general. There was a particularly cool story I thought of when he met Pep Guardiola, which I won't spoil too much, but that was a really cool story as well. It was a really great interview. So those guys did a really good job on that one.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that kind of hit me with it, and again, not giving too much away, was just the family atmosphere that a club like City presents, like the connections that he made in his time playing at Hull and managing there, and just it was fantastic to hear, just what the club means to him and some of the things that he got to enjoy while he was there. So it was really insightful, a great interview.
Yeah, definitely. So check out both of those, the Brian Horton one, and keep an eye out for the Christmas special with us as well. So I think because we didn't have an episode last week, and then we delve into the game specifically on the Wise Men Say episode, I don't want to retread ground and sort of overlap with that. I thought it might be better to sort of look at the last couple of weeks of performances as a whole and get your thoughts on where you see City at this point in the season. We're going to do a sort of a mid-season review next week with Brad and Dan as well. But I guess coming into this festive period, it's sort of traditionally a more congested period. It's sort of the part of the season where the contenders are sort of separated from the pretenders. And I guess the concerning thing would be to look at our form in the last week or so and start to think, are we pretenders? Are we not actually potentially in the hunt for promotion? Which might be a bit of an overreaction. We are still first, but it's probably a question that starts needing to be asked. How do you see it?
Well, I think you just touched on it in the way that you phrased that question. Is, I mean, what's the expectations if at the start of the season we were asked if we'd be 2 points up on top of the league heading into December? We would have snatched a handoff. And I guess the fact that we're still able to be sitting in that position, granted the fact it's been a pretty poor patch of form in the last recent, even just week, as you mentioned, I think that really highlights to us just how much we have achieved in this short period. I'm not on the doom and gloom train yet. I think there's a huge level of optimism around the club. At the moment, still the fact that we're still top of the league, but even more so, I think that we did touch on the Wise Man podcast as well. But the Blackpool loss wasn't exactly one that we got blown away with. It wasn't great, and it was certainly hurts more because it was at the death and the fashion of it. Also, the fact that the game before against Shrewsbury was just horrible from start to finish. But if you take those results away, you can really start to see that it's not uncommon if you reflect on the top six and even as far down as the top 10 in this league for teams to be stuttering. Peterborough went out to an early lead, and you can see that they've had their problems. Portsmouth started reasonably poorly and then came back to the pack. So are we just in the same situation as those leagues? And it's the nature of the league. I mean, if we go and look at the teams that we have lost to, City's problems seem to be far more, I guess, glaring when we verse those teams in the lesser positions or lower down the table than it is against the teams that we've played that are mid and the upper echelon. So certainly not time for doom and gloom. I do think that it's a time that's pivotal if you look at our upcoming fixtures around this December break, but there's still a very long way to go, and we still have to have that reality check that 2 points clear at the top of the league with a game in hand is not a bad position to be in.
Yeah, definitely. And look, it's a great point as well about the inconsistency of form is, if you look at the top 5 in the division, only Lincoln have won 3 in their last 5. Everyone else just has 2 wins in their last 5. And even Lincoln, with those 3 wins, they've lost their last 2 games. So I think a lot of teams are stuttering and no one's really putting the form together. I guess the scary thing is when you do look at the table, there's us ahead on 34 points, but then there's 4 teams right behind us on 32 points. So I think we've gotten quite lucky in the last few games that we're still top and clear at the top because the sides behind us are sort of stuttering. But you kind of get the sense now there's sort of a pile up forming right behind us that if we were to drop points again come the weekend against Portsmouth, quite obviously, I mean, unless it's a draw, Portsmouth will jump ahead of us and other sides may well do so as well. But look, you're right. I mean, pre-season, I think most City supporters were probably just hoping for mid-table finish, upper mid-half, challenge for promotion, maybe playoff places if we're lucky. I would not suspect any City supporters thought we would be clear at the top of the table with a game in hand on both second and third place at this point of the season. So we've certainly outperformed in that sense, but I think with that comes expectation and comes increased pressure on McCann. And I guess I wanted to ask you, and it's not really something that we touched on in any great detail on the Wise Men Say episode, but McCann's place at the club, very reactionary to maybe suggest it, but given the fact that we're top of the table, given the way that we fell off last season and also given the way that he's treated certain players, we'll talk about the KLP situation in a second. Is there any concern from you about his tactics or his refusal to sort of change formation or change structure during the game, and B, perhaps his man management skills and whether we're seeing any sort of concerning trends starting to emerge again this season?
Yeah, there's a lot to consider with that. And I think if we're to reflect on McCann as a whole, I mean, his time at the club when last season was an incredibly poor end to the season. I think many of us were surprised that he was reappointed convincingly. I don't think there was ever a real doubt from any of the communications coming out of Hull that the Allams were looking to offload McCann. So the fact that they stuck with him, to me, tells all of us that he has a very good working relationship, and perhaps that's because he's just the yes man who, seems to toe the line and do essentially what is asked of him by the owners. So that's the first thing. I don't think his job is in jeopardy in no way, shape or form. Do I see his time at the club limited, given the fact where we sit in the league? The last couple of weeks, and we've talked particularly about the last week and the last few results that we've had, have been really unconvincing. And I guess that we do point to that he is somewhat of a one-trick pony with the 4-3-3 formation, and his inability to make the right substitutions at the right time, and to even just tinker with things in the system. I think that everyone who plays us knows exactly what they're up against now. And there's something about a vulnerability in that if teams do have us figured out and this form slump continues, and we find ourselves, back on the curtails of the top 6 or something drastic like that, then I think those questions will have a lot more validation as to what McCann's position is. In regards to his man management skills, I think that we will talk more about the Kane Lewis Potter situation, but very interesting for him to come out in the way that he did and make it really clear that the reason Kane wasn't in the starting lineup at Blackpool was because he hadn't signed that deal. And I think that we need to be really careful in the way that we read into what McCann says. I mentioned this on the Wise Man podcast as well, but we really need to see what happens in the next week. One of the things that I really enjoyed about the start of the season was the fact that we did have a new crop of players that did come in, and with those fresh signings, it seemed that a lot of the tension and concerns that we had within the playing group and the dressing room were alleviated, and there seemed to be this really galvanised group. And I just wonder how much the Keane Lewis Potter situation and the comments that McCann specifically made may jeopardise that. And so that's what my fear is. But I still would like to see how it unfolds before I, make any concrete claims as to what I think has happened and how dangerous or precarious position it does leave the City side in.
Yeah, and I guess bringing in that news of the Lewis Potter contract talks, which I was starting to get a sense of, because similar to other players where we sort of put out a comment, or McCann will make a comment quite early in the season that same thing happened with Device and Burke last season, which I don't even think Burke still signed a deal, but where I think it was last season they talked about Burke and Device in talks for new contracts, and it just never materialized. And similar with this, I think Lewis Potter was said to be in talks quite early in the season, and it's just sort of been radio silence. And in a way, when we see the news about Billy Chadwick and Fleming and I think there was one, and Greaves, of course, all signing new deals, it's almost it makes it more apparent that there's issues with Lewis Potter, that all these other players are being signed up and that we're announcing it, and we're still not hearing anything from the negotiations with Lewis Potter. And the fact that, I think he was out of the side initially because he was isolating because of COVID, and then he was, working back to fitness. So there was sort of a bit of understanding for why he wasn't in the side. But now it's obviously been the question's been asked about why he's not in the side, and it's come out that it's because of his contract. And I just think it's, the kid's, I think he's only 19. I think it's pretty unfair on him to have that negotiation aired so publicly and by his manager to sort of essentially, I can only presume it's essentially to pressure him into signing a new deal. I mean, I would have imagined if Burnsy's asking McCann, why isn't Lewis Potter in the starting 11? McCann will say, oh, look, there's a few issues that we're working on with Keane. He knows, he's aware of what they are, and we'll leave it in the dressing room, sort of thing. Because then whether it's, people could say, oh, is it his fitness? Is it tactics? Is it motivation? Is it whatever? I'm thinking about it, maybe that's worse because there's more speculation and more negativity towards Keane. But at the same time, at least then you're not calling him out on specifically what it is. And I think that's potentially going to cause issues with other players. Other players will look at it and say, well, geez, if I don't sign on the dotted line at the first offer that City give me, are they going to hang me out to dry and sort of turn me over with the supporters? And it may well be the case that we don't know, for instance, what sort of wage they're offering Keane. Is that an issue? Because we know with other former City Academy players that we basically said, sign at a very, very minimally increased wage, even though your performances would suggest that you should be on a lot more than that. It's difficult to know without knowing what the full story is.
Yeah, and I think I did read that one of the big hang-ups on the contract is I heard that the deal was reasonably close, but I think City were trying to look for an extended year. And
yeah, I mean, if it's reasonably close, it just seems such an overreaction to hang him out to dry like this. If it's not even as if they're miles apart, you go, okay, fine, we're going to make a stand. But if you're close, it's just bizarre.
Yeah, and as you've mentioned as well, like there's so many other things that they can tell the media or speak into. Like it would be fine for McCann to come out and say that the reason that he's playing this system or the reason he's selected this team is because of X, Y, Z. That's, what he said. I wanted to keep, Keane fresh for the weekend against Portsmouth or any of the above, insert excuse here. City fans are very, very quick to forgive, as all football fans are, when the results are going the right way. And I think that, for McCann as a manager to cop a little bit of hate or criticism over his team selection is a far lesser problem than it is to, as you mentioned, hang out a 19, 20-year-old to dry, so to speak. And I think that is a really significant issue, particularly if it does affect the dressing room. we're hopeful that within the next week, whatever is going on is resolved, and Keane puts pen to paper, and we're able to forget about this, and we can just say that we're making a mountain out of a molehill, and that would be an ideal scenario. But until we see what happens in the next week, I think we just have to tread with caution.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll move on to another promising young City player who did put pen to paper recently, in the form of Jacob Greaves, who's our player focus for the week. Only recently broken into the City first team, who's the son, obviously, of former City legend Mark Greaves, who played for City between 96 and 2002, making 204 appearances, which is a pretty impressive number these days. I don't think you get many players who are going to come close to that sort of appearance stat. Interestingly, Jacob was born while Mark was playing for City, so extra little bit of connection there for Jacob as well. But Hull local, grown up in the City, was out on loan at Cheltenham last season, but we sort of heard coming into this season that both he and Max Sheaf had really good loan spells and would sort of be around the first team. And Greaves, funnily enough, the two, if you'd asked me which of the two was more likely to break into the side, I would have thought Sheaf, because that centre-back position is so saturated with players for us, with more senior bodies like Device and McLaughlin, and then we brought in Festus Arthur as well, who was very highly rated, and other guys like that who you'd think would maybe be ahead of him in the pecking order. But he took his chance in the EFL Trophy. I think he made his debut against Leicester's under-21s, and then came into the league shortly after that, I think in October, and hasn't really put a foot wrong. So and signed a new deal as well, which is great for him. Not to say that it's any reflection on Lewis Potter that he hasn't, but it's great for Greaves to have that certainty, to be rewarded for his performances, and to really sort of make that transition into the senior side.
Yeah, and let's not forget, just that feat in itself is, what a difference 12 months can make. He's keeping none other than Geordie Device out of the squad. And granted, Device's form hasn't been great, but if we, wind back the clock 12 months or around about 12 months' time, when we had that, that precarious championship run in, and Device was injured, and everyone was kind of sitting on the fence saying, well, once Device comes back, or once the COVID stuff is over, and we get Device back, it'll be like a new signing. It'll be fine. City's defense will be shored up. And it's a player with incredible pedigree. And we've often on this podcast praised Device for being a leader in the team, and one of City's more pivotal players. And so for him to fall off, I don't know if it's necessarily just related to Device being out of form, or if Greaves, as you said, has just come on in droves and really impressed in his game. And he's hardly put a foot wrong since he's taken that position, and it's warranted, and rightfully so. Geordie Device finds himself, scratching to get back into the team, and that's a testament.
Not even on the bench sometimes, yeah.
That's right, and that's a real testament to how Greaves is playing, and the fact that he is, as you said, a academy prospect, a local junior who's been out on loan spells and proven his worth. It's fantastic for the club, and fantastic for him personally, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and look, and it's great as well, because you mentioned Device, and I think I posed to Dan in a previous episode. It will be interesting to see what happens in January with Device, and I would suspect he's going to be pushing for a move to leave the club. And if you'd sort of said 6 months ago that we could sell Device and not really miss him, or not really sort of regret selling him, I'd be surprised. But Greaves has really come in and made it. It sort of reminds me of, in a way, Harry Maguire's emergence when we brought him in as quite a young kid, and yes, he had a whole lot more senior experience, but we were sort of calling out for Maguire to get more game time anyway. But coming into that side when you had Michael Dawson and Curtis Davies and Alex Bruce, he just sort of slotted in seamlessly. And once he broke through, there was that sense of, okay, well, we can actually rely on him. We don't need these more senior guys if they're injured or if they get sold or what have you. It's really refreshing to have a young, hungry player who's sort of going to improve. If we were to be promoted, for example, I'd be quite happy to sort of give him that chance to start in our championship position, to see if he can. He was playing League 2 last season. He's now playing League 1. Whether he can then make that step up again, as you see with guys like Sam Clucas and stuff, who sort of rise through the divisions. But it's a really exciting time for him as a player. It's a really exciting time for us as supporters to watch him grow and develop. And I'd be really interested to see what happens with Device now and whether we do look to move him on.
Yeah, and I think that again, it's worth noting that we are in December, and a lot can happen between now and the end of the season. It's very likely that within that time, touch wood, I hope this doesn't happen. But if Greaves or Reece Burke were to be injured, having someone of the caliber of Geordie Device to come straight back in is incredible for a League One side, and I think that's worth noting. And so I haven't given up on Device yet, but just in the way that Burke and Greaves are both playing, it's just fantastic. And I concur. If we were to get promoted and City do find themselves in the Championship, I certainly see no reason as to why Greaves shouldn't be given the first opportunity to try and defend his place in the squad at centre back for sure. He's proven to us, that he's more than capable. And as you mentioned, with Sam Clucas is a great example. You don't really have any hesitations of seeing how he wouldn't be able to go on and improve to the next division up.
No, definitely. But we'll look ahead now to a pretty big clash at the rather painful time of 4:30 in the morning, our time, Saturday morning against Portsmouth. Top of the table clash. I mean, I'm trying to think. I think when we played Ipswich, they were second in the table as well. So this might be our second top of the table clash. 34 points versus 32 points. Real 6-pointer on our hands. Sort of alluded to before in terms of form, Portsmouth have won 2 of their last 5, which is the same as us, with 2 draws thrown in there versus our 2 losses. So pretty even when it comes to form. They've scored a goal more than us, but they have played an additional game to us. They're managed by Kenny Jackett, who I probably associate most strongly with his spell at Millwall, where he did a reasonably decent job for them. But he came into Portsmouth back in 2017 and has sort of been there since then. And I think they were League One at that point, so he sort of kind of kept them in League One and hasn't quite pushed on to get them promoted back to the Championship. But I think Portsmouth, it's sort of funny because we've just played Blackpool as well, who are another club where obviously reasonably recent Premier League stints, but then really sort of went into free fall and plummeted through the divisions. And both Blackpool and Portsmouth have recovered reasonably well to become solid, stable Championship or lower Championship or probably upper League One clubs. Which in its own sense is sad that they don't have any sort of lasting legacy of that Premier League stint. But in a way, it's also reassuring that you look at Bolton in League Two, who are sort of starting to put some form together, but you look at other sides in League Two who were in the Premier League or First Division back in the day, like Bradford, are sort of struggling in League Two. It is heartening to see that Portsmouth have sort of put it together and sort of recovered as a club and sort of putting themselves on a path back towards being what they once were.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's something that we can empathise with, given the steady free fall that we found ourselves in over the last couple of years and the decline from a double relegation. And I think that not being supporters of those big glory clubs is there's a genuine respect and an understanding of those lower divisions, of what it takes to actually get out of it, and I guess the path that is ahead of those clubs. So yeah, I concur. It's great to see Portsmouth on the incline, and also just I thought they were really unlucky not to find themselves in the Championship last year. They fell at the end, and then with the COVID stuff, you had that really strange playoff system where Wickham ended up finding themselves sneaking through, but Portsmouth certainly knocking on the door. And I think when I looked at the league at the beginning of the season and started to make predictions, I had Portsmouth well and truly finding themselves in the top 6. And so it's no surprise to me that when they visit the KCOM on Saturday or Friday night UK time, that they're sitting second in the table and really are going to be a threat to this competition.
Yeah, look, I think it's really interesting. I think Ipswich is another one who last season started off really strongly and then sort of fell away, where you could say they were perhaps a bit unfortunate, but certainly Portsmouth in the way that playoff system ended up. It's an interesting one because I sort of touched on it on the Wise Men Say episode, but with the way that the League One season ended back in March, I think it was, given that the championship season continued to the end, I'm sort of curious to see if our fast start to the season, Charlton having a reasonable start to the season as well, sort of impacted by that maybe increased or improved fitness as compared to other sides in the division. I mean, you look at, sure, we've recruited Josh Emmanuel and Smallwood, who probably didn't play a whole lot for Blackburn last season, and a few others who wouldn't have had that benefit. But I wonder if you're sort of seeing, and I guess it's an even bigger credit to Portsmouth that they are doing as well as they are, given how disjointed their end to their last season would have been.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and I think that it's worth looking at this. I guess in a broader scheme, is understanding that those teams, as you mentioned, like the Charltons of the world, and I guess us being able to come in with that, hit the ground running. I guess the question that I would then add to is, well, what's that going to look like for the back end of the season, and is that one of the things that we can expect to see over this pretty jam-packed Christmas period, with the way that McCann uses his playing roster and the squad selection, purely based on the fact that the challenges that we're facing now are probably perhaps more associated to fatigue, or potentially as opposed to those teams that have had a kind of reverse, where they've had a longer preseason and may have started slower, but now seem in scrap. So yeah, it's a really interesting point, and I guess only time will tell. But it's definitely worth thinking about.
Yeah, so it's certainly going to be interesting from that perspective. And then I guess another aspect to look at as well is potential changes to the side for the game. I guess two talking points. We've already sort of touched on Lewis Potter, but the other one was the fact that George Honeyman was absent. And I don't know if I haven't seen any news on what actually kept him out, whether it was just a tightness or an injury or something like that.
It was reported that it was a tight hamstring. So okay. He at training he sat out, or he moved out of the drill. I don't think that it's anything significant. They are hopeful that he will be back for the Portsmouth clash, but Blackpool just came too soon for him, and I suspect that McCann probably did look ahead to the upcoming fixtures and see that there's some really crucial games, and probably thought that he'd rather be safe than sorry and make sure that Honeyman's available for those, which I don't have a problem with.
Yeah, and I suspect it's probably the same reason why Emmanuel was rested for Coyle against Blackpool as well, just because Emmanuel's playing style, I guess, would be very taxing on him. So I think giving him that rest before that run-in of games, it's one of those, in hindsight, we lost the Blackpool game, so maybe you play a stronger side against Blackpool to secure the win. But then if you lose the game against Portsmouth, maybe that's a more damaging game to lose because of their position in the table. So I think that's probably why he's prioritised that Portsmouth game. I suspect, we'll probably see Emmanuel back in the side, and in that case, probably Honeyman as well. I guess all eyes will be on our front three. Do you foresee any changes to that front three? Do you see any potential for a surprise Lewis Potter return to the starting 11?
Look, fingers and toes crossed that is what we think. I think that I speak for nearly every single fan that. One of the things that is worth noting about that as well is how we have had multiple goal scorers. Even Tom Eaves, who is copying it from every single angle whenever you look at any of the social media posts. He doesn't seem to be certainly revered by many City fans at the moment. He's still managed to pop up for a really significant return in the limited minutes that he has played. I do understand the frustrations, but if you think about the form that Magennis has been showing as well, who's probably reached a level that I didn't expect him to have, in the way that he is a real threat, just a physical, throw himself about, and has really shown some great finishing as well. The fact that you've got Kane Lewis Potter, Eaves, Magennis all popping up, and Wilkes, of course, who have been reasonably prolific.
Really good goal against Blackpool, I got to say as well. We haven't touched on that, but that finish for his goal was very composed.
Yeah, and what a situation to be in, right? I mean, we find ourselves often, bemoaning these poor results recently, and then we have the reality check of, well, we're still 2 points clear at the top, and every single person in our attacking line, with the exception of KLP, due to the recent times with COVID and all the rest of it, have been extremely prolific. And
Yeah.
I mean, if we were going through these games and getting beaten 1-0, 2-0, 3-0 week in, week out without finding ourselves on the score sheet, then I think there would be a real reason or cause for concern. But the fact that that's not the situation, I think that I still go into any game that we play with a sense of optimism. Going, we do know that the chances of us scoring are strong. What the team selection looks like with the three that McCann goes with against Portsmouth, I'm not so sure. And it hinges heavily on the KLP situation, but it's also not a large concern, because I feel that whoever does get given the nod, I'm confident that they will be able to go out and put in a performance, particularly given the fact that it's one of those bigger games, or our first real pointer.
Yeah, and I guess, and also one player that we haven't touched on yet, but who I did make note of this morning and just completely forgot to bring up, was Callum Elder, who supplied the assists for both goals against Blackpool, is quietly starting to put together quite a solid season. I think he had a bit of a slow start to the season, and there was a few murmurings about potentially getting Fleming into the side. But in recent times, I'm forgetting which game it was in particular. There was a game recently where I thought he had his best game of the season. It might have actually been, I don't know if it was the Oxford game or it might have been a game before that, but he's been putting in some tremendous displays recently, and then got both assists for the goals against Blackpool, which was great to see. Yeah,
absolutely. And I guess we're going to always be very fond of Callum Elder, given where we come from, and we enjoy the Australian connection to City as well. But yeah, the
Sydney sider as well. Yeah, I think he might have even grown up in Manly, so very local,
very close indeed. And to see the success that that he's bringing, the form that he's in is fantastic as well. And so long may that continue. If we've got Emmanuel and Elder stemming down the flanks and whipping balls in, it's a really promising time.
Yeah, always going to be creating opportunities with those two in the side. Absolutely. I guess then the tricky question is, what's your score prediction for this one?
Yeah, I'm really confident. I think that this is going to be one of those games. I haven't had the same feeling with the last two games, but I think that we're going to make a really good account of ourselves. And I'm expecting, and I'm optimistically hoping and praying for a 2-0 victory.
Yeah, I am closer to your optimism than I would have been. I think it's interesting. If we had done an episode last week, I was very cautious about that Blackpool game, and in fact, in the tipping competition that I'm a part of, I actually tipped Blackpool in that one, which was much to the disgust of podcast guests Mitch and Mike. Both did not enjoy that, but I guess I sort of was proved correct in the end. And so Blackpool's form was a real concern for me. But I think with Portsmouth, the fact that they'll sort of see it as an opportunity to go at us. I think it can go one of two ways, and this is sort of echoing what I said on the Wiseman Say episode. But either they'll be smart. Unfortunately, they could be smart and look at the last few games from us and use those as a blueprint for how to approach us and sort of press us and really sort of not give us any time on the ball. And sort of grind out a result, or they can kind of come at us and play their own style and play more expansive, in which case I think we'd see a result similar to the Ipswich game. So I'm cautiously optimistic that they'll approach it from there. They want to go out and win. They don't want to stop us from winning in that sort of sense, if that makes sense, and they'll sort of play their own style. So I could see a 2-1 or a 2-0 victory for us, which would be fantastic to get back to winning ways and sort of calm down the nervous murmurings that are going around. Because look, as you say, we are still 2 points clear at the top, and we actually have a game in hand on both Portsmouth and Peterborough and Ipswich. I mean, it's only Lincoln who are on the same amount of games played as us. And then there was the news recently. The reason we're only previewing the Portsmouth game, the Portsmouth game, is the Sunderland game has been postponed due to COVID cases in their squad. So we will end up having 2 games in hand on a lot of sides, which in some cases, having games in hand if you're at the bottom fighting relegation, I think it's a real bad thing to have, because you're sort of, the mentality is that you're those 3 points behind, and the pressure is on to get those 3 points just to sort of keep up. Whereas at the top, I think it's almost a good thing, because the fact that we're top with a game in hand, it actually lets those players play a bit freer. I think there's a little less pressure on the games coming up, because they know that they've still got those games in hand where they can catch up if they need to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that in some ways you're right, but I also think that the drop points at Blackpool really highlights the importance of this game, given the fact that it is one of us two. Just psychologically, if you're able to beat the second team, and particularly if other results fall our way and we end up with a 5-point gap, that's hugely significant. And one thing I will say as well, I forgot to mention, is a good friend. He's a Portsmouth fan, so Richie, if you're watching, and I have it on good account that he always feels very nervous when Portsmouth play away from home, and thinks that their form is horrible away from Fratton Park. So that might also be one of the factors that I have in the back of my mind as I make my prediction.
Yeah, I think there's a few Aussie Portsmouth supporters, because my old manager at an accounting firm I used to work at was a Portsmouth supporter as well. And back then, that would have been about 2015, 2016, back when they were, sort of League Two. And he was a supporter from the Premier League days, and was sort of glumly still supporting them while they were sort of dropping through the divisions. So and as we said earlier, it is good to say that they're starting to make their way back up. I think there's, probably not to the same extent as a club like Leeds, but I do suspect there's a very, very much a sleeping giant of international Portsmouth supporters who've sort of suffered through some pretty hard years and might finally start to be seeing some lighter days ahead.
Yeah, absolutely, and good luck to them after this week.
After this week, yeah, exactly right. There's 2 automatic spots that they're welcome to the second one, just not the first. But look, thank you for joining me for this episode today, Logan. We've sort of done back-to-back podcast episodes this morning, but it's been a good morning.
It's been 3 hours of talking all things City. It's been a joy.
Brilliant, absolutely. And look, as we mentioned earlier, we are doing our mid-season sort of review of the season so far. We'll kind of look at favorite goals, best games, that sort of thing. So we're going to be doing that Monday evening our time, which I guess is Monday morning UK time. So keep an eye out for that, everyone else. And then until then,